Between every great empire, another world quietly thrived. History books overflow with tales of Roman legions and Mongol hordes, but they often skip the fascinating kingdoms that existed in the spaces between them. These were the buffer states, political entities born in the dangerous cracks between rival powers. We are going to resurrect their stories, not as footnotes or victims, but as brilliant survivors who mastered a deadly art. By the end, you will understand the ingenious strategies that allowed small nations to prosper while surrounded by giants. How did a kingdom become more valuable as a neutral zone than as conquered territory? What forgotten cultures turned their precarious location into a source of immense wealth and unique identity? Their success was a high-stakes game of diplomatic and economic skill, and its lessons echo powerfully today. What does it take to survive when you are caught in the middle? This unique position is not merely a border, it is an entire nation built on a paradox. To understand how these forgotten states thrived, we must first grasp the delicate mechanics of their existence. A buffer state is not just a contested strip of land between two rivals. It is a recognized, functioning political entity whose survival depends on a dangerous equilibrium. Imagine two powerful neighbors locked in a tense standoff, each capable of overwhelming the other, but at a terrible cost. Direct conflict would be a third space to exist between them, a kind of agreed upon neutral ground. This is the buffer state's foundation. Its existence is not an accident, but a calculated, often unspoken agreement. Both empires understand that this smaller kingdom serves a critical purpose. It keeps them physically apart, reducing the chance of a spark igniting a full-scale war. This creates a fascinating and perilous reality for the buffer state itself. Its leaders are not naive. They know their independence is conditional, maintained only as long as it serves the giants on either side. The threat of absorption is constant, a sword hanging by a thread. Yet within that very danger lies extraordinary opportunity. This is where the art of survival begins. A clever buffer state learns to leverage its position. It becomes a master of balance, offering just enough loyalty to each empire to keep them satisfied, but never so much that it triggers an invasion from the other. It can play the rivals against each other, negotiating for trade rights, military aid, or political concessions. One empire might grant favorable tariffs to ensure the buffer's ports are not used by its rival. The other might provide weapons not for conquest, but to ensure the buffer can defend itself and remain a stable barrier. In this high-stakes game, the buffer state's greatest asset is its own continued existence. Its success is measured not in vast territorial expansion, but in maintaining that precious, profitable space in the middle, turning geopolitical instability into a source of wealth and de facto independence. The kings and merchants who navigated this tightrope were among history's most skilled diplomats, because one misstep could mean the end of their world. This high-wire act demanded a specific kind of leadership, one defined by relentless and brilliant diplomacy. The most successful buffer states mastered a delicate art we might call multi-vector statecraft. Their foreign policy was not a simple choice between two allies, but a constant, dynamic juggling act. Formal neutrality was the public face, a necessary declaration to avoid appearing as a direct threat. But behind the scenes, their rulers were master networkers, cultivating deep and often contradictory relationships with every power in the region. Their value came from what they could offer each empire, carefully doled out to maintain balance. A buffer king might grant one neighbor exclusive use of a vital mountain pass for trade, providing a lucrative and secure route. To the rival empire, he might offer something equally valuable, like detailed intelligence on regional troop movements gathered from his own network of scouts and merchants. He could even permit the limited, regulated passage of military forces through his territory, an incredibly risky move that required immense trust and precise terms. This was not betrayal, it was calculation. Every concession was a bargaining chip, a down payment on continued independence. To play this game, the ruling elite of these states had to be exceptionally adaptable. Fluency in multiple languages was not a luxury for scholars, it was a survival skill for diplomats and spies. A deep understanding of the cultural nuances and court politics in, say, Constantinople, Ctesiphon, and Chang'an was essential. You needed to know which imperial minister favored war, which prince was in debt, and what ceremonial gift would carry the most weight. This cultural intelligence allowed buffer state envoys to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial diplomacy, to offer the right favor at the right time to the right person. They were constantly recalibrating, like a sailor adjusting the sails to shifting winds. A new emperor on one throne might demand more loyalty, requiring a subtle cooling of relations with the other, perhaps by delaying a trade caravan or losing a diplomatic message. The goal was always the same, to keep both giants feeling just secure enough and just uncertain enough that conquering the buffer state seemed more trouble than it was worth. It was a perpetual dance on the edge of a knife, where a single misstep in protocol or a poorly chosen word could be interpreted as an act of aggression, shattering the fragile peace they depended on. The true genius of these states was not just political, it was economic. While diplomacy kept the wolves from the door, it was commerce that built the palace. These interstice kingdoms discovered that their greatest vulnerability, their location between rivals, could be transformed into their most valuable asset. They became the essential middlemen in a world of blockaded borders and imperial suspicion. By controlling the only safe mountain pass, the navigable stretch of a great river, or the coastal harbor between two hostile powers, a buffer state held the keys to regional trade. They levied transit tariffs not as petty theft, but as a fee for security and stability. A merchant caravan traveling from the Byzantine Empire to the Sassanid Persians, for instance, would face immense risk and countless bandits along a contested frontier. But if a neutral Armenian kingdom controlled a key corridor, it could guarantee safe passage for a price. That price made the kingdom wealthy. Overnight, these strategic valleys and passes blossomed into thriving commercial hubs. Cities like Palmyra in the Syrian desert or Samarkand on the Silk Road were not just way stations, they became glittering cosmopolitan centers where goods, ideas, and people from competing empires could mingle freely. The buffer state provided a neutral ground where business could be conducted without political entanglement, a service both empires desperately needed. But they did not stop at mere toll collection. To cement their indispensability, these clever nations often cultivated niche industries that served all sides. They became master craftsmen, producing luxury goods, intricate metalwork, or fine textiles that were coveted in imperial courts. They established sophisticated banking and credit systems, allowing wealth to be transferred across hostile borders without moving physical coin. Perhaps most tellingly, many became renowned suppliers of highly skilled mercenaries. A buffer state, constantly balancing military threats, often developed a formidable warrior culture. By renting out these professional soldiers as neutral parties, they provided a valuable service to empires wary of expanding their own armies, while also ensuring their own fighters were well-trained and well-funded. This economic strategy created a powerful incentive for the empires to preserve the buffer's autonomy. Conquering such a state would not just be a military cost, it would be an economic catastrophe. It would disrupt the vital trade flow, destroy the trusted banking networks, and eliminate the source of specialized goods and troops. the buffer state made itself more valuable alive and independent than it would be absorbed and controlled. Its prosperity became the very guarantee of its survival, weaving its economy so intricately into the fabric of the region that pulling it out would unravel everything. The story of Armenia is a masterclass in this dangerous balancing act. Nestled in the rugged highlands of the Caucasus, this ancient kingdom found itself squarely on the front line between two of the ancient world's superpowers, Rome in the west and Parthia, later Persia, in the east. For centuries, the fertile valleys and strategic mountain passes of Armenia were not just a homeland, but the ultimate prize and the primary battleground in a Cold War that spanned continents. Its survival depended on an almost impossible feat, navigating the relentless ambitions of both empires without being crushed by either. The early kings understood the game perfectly. One of the most audacious was Tigranes the Great, who reigned in the 1st century before the Common Era. He witnessed the Roman-Parthian rivalry and saw not a threat but an unprecedented opportunity. In the brief window when both giants were preoccupied elsewhere, Tigranes launched a breathtaking campaign of expansion. He built an Armenian empire that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean, for a moment making his kingdom the dominant power in the region. His success was a direct result of exploiting that central buffer state truth: when your neighbors are focused on each other, you have room to maneuver. But such outright power was a fleeting dream in this neighborhood. The Roman legions and Parthian cataphracts soon turned their gaze back to the Caucasus, and the age of the Armenian Empire ended as quickly as it began. What followed was far more instructive. Later Armenian rulers from the Arsacid dynasty onward perfected a more sustainable, subtle art. They abandoned dreams of conquest and embraced the reality of their position. Their crown became a diplomatic tool, awarded and reaffirmed by both Rome and Parthia in a constant tug of war. An Armenian king might be crowned in Rome by a Roman emperor with all the pomp and ceremony of an ally. Yet at the very same time, he would send his heir to be raised and educated at the Parthian court, a powerful gesture of goodwill and assurance to the Eastern Empire. This was dual allegiance as statecraft. By maintaining royal family ties to both imperial courts, Armenian kings created a web of obligation and kinship that made direct invasion politically messy. To attack Armenia was not just to attack a neutral kingdom, it was to attack a quasi-relative, a diplomatic affront that could shatter carefully maintained treaties. They became experts at reading the geopolitical winds. If Roman influence grew too heavy, they might subtly allow Parthian cultural practices to flourish or delay the payment of a symbolic tribute. If Parthian pressure mounted, they would reaffirm their old treaties with Rome, perhaps granting legionaries right of passage through a key fort. This intricate dance of allegiance switching was not seen as treachery, but as the essential skill of preservation. For over 400 years, through the rise and fall of emperors and dynasties, this strategy allowed Armenia to maintain a unique, semi-independent identity, a Christian kingdom that served as a critical and brilliantly managed buffer between two vast pagan and later Zoroastrian empires. Their longevity stands as a testament to the power of strategic ambiguity. Armenia's dance of diplomacy was a subtle art, but on the opposite edge of the medieval world, a different, far more rugged model of the buffer state emerged. Here, survival was not negotiated in gilded palaces, but earned on windswept frontiers through sheer martial ingenuity. This was the world of the march, a term that meant borderland but implied a fortress. In an era of sprawling empires and uncertain frontiers, rulers discovered they could not micromanage every distant mile of their territory. The solution was to outsource danger. They would grant vast tracts of borderland to ambitious, trusted warlords, giving them near-royal authority to defend the empire's edge. These marcher lords were not mere governors, they were entrepreneur kings of the frontier, and their domains became the ultimate militarized buffer zones. The most famous example lies in the mountain passes between the Pyrenees. As the Carolingian Empire of Charlemagne pushed south against the powerful Muslim Caliphate of Al-Andalus in Iberia, they established the Spanish March. This was not a clearly defined border with a fence, but a wild, contested territory of castles and fortified towns. The Count of Barcelona, ruling this march, held power that would make a Central European duke envious. He could raise armies, levy taxes, and make treaties with local Moorish rulers, all in the name of securing the Frankish frontier. His loyalty was crucial, but his distance from the imperial heartland meant he operated with a freedom that was both a necessity and a latent threat. This autonomy had a fascinating consequence. Over generations, the culture of the march evolved into something distinct from the empire it was meant to protect. In the Spanish March, a unique blend of Gothic, Frankish, and local Iberian traditions, seasoned by constant contact and conflict with Al-Andalus, slowly crystallized. The Latin spoken there began to shift, evolving into a new language. The administrative practices, the laws, even the architecture became its own. Without anyone quite planning it, the buffer zone gave birth to a new nation, Catalonia. The march did not just defend a border, it incubated a new identity, proving that these frontier zones were crucibles of cultural synthesis as much as they were military bulwarks. A similar and even more transformative story played out centuries later on the other flank of Christendom. As the Byzantine Empire weakened, the Turkish frontier of Anatolia became a chaotic, fertile ground for warrior bands. The Ottoman state began not as a mighty empire, but as a small frontier beylik, an uk, on the very edge of the Byzantine world. These uk lords were Ghazi warriors, champions of faith, but they were also pragmatic frontier operators. Their power was built on the classic march economy of raid and trade. They would launch raids into Byzantine territory, but also establish lucrative commercial relations, controlling the flow of goods, people, and information across a blurred and shifting line. The early Ottomans excelled at absorbing the people and techniques of the very frontier they were conquering, recruiting Byzantine soldiers and administrators into their own growing system. Their entire state was, in its origins, a supremely successful buffer entity, thriving on the instability of the border until it grew strong enough to erase the border entirely. In both cases, the march demonstrates a core truth. When an empire delegates the dirty, dangerous work of frontier defense to a semi-independent agent, it is gambling. It gains a powerful shield, but it also creates a potential rival, a new center of power that may one day write its own history. The buffer, in these instances, was not just a space between empires, but often the very seed from which the next empire would grow. Yet the most intricate dance of medieval diplomacy unfolded not on a desolate frontier, but in the fertile heart of Europe itself. Here, a kingdom did not just balance two empires, it wove itself into the very fabric of both, becoming indispensable to powers that claimed to be its masters. This was the Kingdom of Burgundy, or the Kingdom of Arles, a sprawling realm that for centuries occupied the strategic corridor between the rising Kingdom of France and the colossal Holy Roman Empire. Its story is a masterclass in feudal finesse, where survival meant expertly navigating a labyrinth of oaths, titles, and symbolic gestures. The rulers of Burgundy faced a unique dilemma. They were technically vassals to two different overlords. The King of France claimed their western lands, while the Holy Roman Emperor, seated far to the east in Germany, claimed their eastern territories and their royal title. This dual subordination could have been a fatal weakness, a legal excuse for invasion from either side. Instead, the dukes and counts of Burgundy turned it into their greatest strength. They became masters of selective loyalty. When the French king demanded military service for a campaign, a Burgundian lord might provide a token force, just enough to fulfill his oath without weakening his own defenses. Simultaneously, he would send lavish gifts and pledges of support to the Holy Roman Emperor, emphasizing his crucial role in guarding the empire's western flank. They played these feudal obligations like a finely tuned instrument, extracting privileges in return for their conditional allegiance. From France, they might secure exemptions from certain taxes or the right to administer justice independently. From the empire, they might receive confirmation of their rights to tolls on the vital trade routes crossing the Alps. Their position as the middleman was not just political, it was profoundly economic. Burgundy sat astride the great north-south trade axis of Europe, merchants moving from the bustling markets of Flanders to the trading fairs of Champagne and onward to Italy had to traverse Burgundian lands. The kingdom grew wealthy not by producing goods, but by facilitating their movement, levying tolls, providing security, and establishing renowned commercial courts that settled disputes fairly and quickly. This commitment to order extended to the realm of ideas. In the 12th century, the city of Bologna in northern Italy saw a remarkable revival of Roman law based on the legal codes of Emperor Justinian. This intellectual fire spread north, and Burgundy became a crucial conduit. Its courts and scholars absorbed and adapted these legal principles, creating a sophisticated system of jurisprudence that attracted merchants who sought predictable, rational justice over the arbitrary whims of local lords. Burgundy became a beacon of administrative sophistication in a fragmented world. Its eventual disappearance from the map was a testament to its enduring value. It was not destroyed in a sudden, violent conquest. Instead, its dissolution was a slow, meticulous process of diplomatic absorption that spanned generations. As France and the Empire gradually centralized their power, they used marriage alliances, intricate inheritance laws, and patient political pressure to peel away Burgundian territories piece by piece. The last independent duke, Charles the Bold, overplayed his hand in the late 15th century, dreaming of forging a new Middle Kingdom from the North Sea to the Alps. His ambitions shattered on the battlefield, and his lands were meticulously divided between the French king and the Habsburg emperor through treaties and marriages. Burgundy did not fall, it was carefully dismantled, its parts integrated into the growing bodies of its neighbors because its strategic and economic value was too great to leave in independent hands. Its legacy lived on not as a nation, but as a set of prosperous provinces and a lasting lesson in how to thrive within a web of obligations. While Burgundy navigated a web of feudal law, on the other side of the world a different kind of buffer held the line not with parchment, but with stone and steel. The story shifts to the sun-baked plains and rugged hills of the Indian subcontinent, where a constellation of kingdoms known as the Rajput confederacies faced a relentless tide of imperial expansion. For centuries, they stood as the primary bulwark between the powerful Muslim sultanates of Delhi and later the mighty Mughal Empire and the rest of the Hindu heartland to the south. Theirs was a resistance built on geography, a fierce code of honor, and a pragmatic understanding of power. The Rajputs did not merely occupy a space between empires, they fortified it, turning their homeland into a labyrinth of defense so costly to conquer that it often made more sense for an emperor to negotiate than to fight. At the heart of this strategy were their legendary mountain fortresses, perched atop seemingly inaccessible peaks like eagles' nests. Citadels like Chittorgarh, Kumbhalgarh, and Ranthambore were marvels of medieval military engineering. Their walls snaked for miles along ridgelines, enclosing entire cities that could withstand sieges for years. Conquering such a fort was a nightmare for any invading army, requiring massive resources, endless time, and staggering casualties. The Rajputs understood that their survival depended on making the price of their subjugation unbearably high. This formidable defense was matched by an equally formidable culture. Rajput society was organized around a warrior ethos where martial skill and honor, known as dharma, were paramount. From a young age, men were trained for battle, and the defense of their homeland and sovereignty was seen as a sacred duty. This created a populace that could mobilize into a capable militia almost overnight, making even a successful invasion a protracted and bloody affair of guerrilla warfare. An emperor might take the fort, but he would never truly pacify the hills. Yet, for all their martial pride, the Rajput rulers were not inflexible. Their survival also hinged on a sophisticated and often misunderstood policy of selective engagement. They maintained their Hindu sovereignty and cultural traditions fiercely, but they also engaged in complex political marriages and treaties with the very Muslim powers they resisted. A Rajput king might give his daughter in marriage to a Mughal emperor, a gesture that secured a political alliance, brought royal titles and lands into the family, and provided a direct line of communication to the imperial court. This was not surrender, it was statecraft. It allowed kingdoms like Muor, under legendary rulers like Maharana Pratap, to retain their internal autonomy and religious practices while existing within the Mughal political orbit. They would provide military service to the empire when it suited their interests, often securing their borders in the process, but they fiercely guarded their right to rule their own lands and people according to their own traditions. This delicate balance allowed Rajput culture, with its distinct art, architecture, and social codes, to flourish under imperial shadow. They became the empire's most formidable cavalry and trusted administrators, even as they preserved their own identity within their mountain fastnesses. Their story reveals a profound buffer state truth. Sometimes the most effective resistance is not perpetual war, but the ability to be both a formidable enemy and a valuable ally, ensuring that your continued independence remains in everyone's best interest. But the most dramatic and perhaps most misunderstood buffer state of the early modern era was one born from the shattering of a great empire. As the Mongol Golden Horde fractured, a new power rose in its southern reaches on a peninsula jutting into the Black Sea. The Crimean Khanate was not a passive neutral zone. It was a fiercely independent, predatory force that for 3 centuries mastered the art of playing two titans against each other. Its survival was built on a foundation of controlled terror and brilliant political maneuvering, a strategy that kept both Moscow and Istanbul in a state of wary dependence. The Khanate's economy was a 3-legged stool, and each leg was designed to maximize its value as a buffer. The first was its control over the vast Pontic steppe, the grassy sea north of the Black Sea. This made Crimea the gatekeeper for all north-south trade, and its khans levied heavy tariffs on goods moving between the Slavic world and the Ottoman markets. The second leg was more notorious, the practice of organizing large-scale slave raids, known as the harvesting of the steppe. Crimean Tatar cavalry would launch lightning-fast expeditions north into Polish and Russian territories, capturing people to be sold in the major slave markets of Kaffa and Constantinople. While a source of immense human hardship from the Khanate's coldly strategic view, this served a critical purpose. It kept the Russian frontier destabilized and economically drained, preventing the Tsardom from consolidating its southern borders and turning its full attention to Crimea itself. The third leg of the stool was direct subsidy from the Ottoman Sultan. In exchange for recognizing the Sultan's religious authority as caliph and providing military support when called, the Crimean Khans received annual payments of gold and grain. This Ottoman stipend was not charity. It was a retainer fee, ensuring the Khanate's powerful cavalry would be available to fight the Sultan's wars and, more importantly, to continue acting as a hostile barrier against Russian expansion. The Khan's genius lay in balancing these 3 sources of power. To the Ottomans, he presented Crimea as Islam's northern bulwark, the indispensable shield that absorbed the blows of the Slavic infidel. To the Russians, he was a dangerous, unpredictable neighbor who could be persuaded, with enough tribute or diplomatic concession, to limit his raids or even ally with Moscow against a common foe. Crimean diplomacy was a high-stakes auction where loyalty was sold to the highest bidder, or more accurately, to the bidder who posed the most immediate threat. A Khan might swear eternal friendship to the Tsar, only to lead his horsemen in an Ottoman campaign the following season. This perpetual double game required an intimate understanding of the weaknesses and ambitions in both imperial courts. The system worked flawlessly for centuries because both empires believed they needed the Khanate. For Istanbul, Crimea was a cheap way to project power, a semi-autonomous army that cost far less than maintaining a permanent garrison on the distant steppe. For Moscow, as long as the Khanate existed, the path to the warm water ports of the Black Sea was blocked, forcing Russia to focus its expansion elsewhere. The end came not from a failure of diplomacy, but from a shift in the fundamental equation of power. In the 18th century, Russian military technology and state organization advanced dramatically. The construction of fortified lines southward gradually neutralized the Tatar cavalry's raiding advantage. More importantly, Russia's growing strength meant it no longer saw the Khanate as a useful buffer, but as the final obstacle to its imperial destiny. When the armies of Catherine the Great finally conquered the peninsula in 1783, they were not defeating a peer, they were removing an antiquated barrier. The Crimean Khanate's strategic utility had expired, and with it, 300 years of brilliant, ruthless independence vanished from the map. Its story is the ultimate lesson in buffer state reality. Your value is not eternal, but exists only as long as the giants beside you believe they need you in the middle. But the buffer state's ultimate form was not a small kingdom, but a colossal, self-aware republic built to be a wall. At the dawn of the modern era, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth emerged as a political giant, a conscious creation designed to stand between two colliding worlds. To its west lay the realm of Western Christendom, dominated by the sprawling Habsburg dynasty and the ambitious Kingdom of Sweden. To its east, the rising tide of Orthodox Russia and the persistent power of the Ottoman Empire. The Commonwealth did not simply occupy the space between these forces, it was engineered to be the definitive buffer, a civilization-sized bulwark protecting Europe's eastern flank. Its leaders saw their mission in almost mythic terms as the Antemurale Christianitatis, the bulwark of Christendom. This was not a passive role but an active, defining identity. The Commonwealth's political system was a direct reflection of this precarious, powerful position. It was a noble republic, a unique fusion of monarchy and aristocracy where power resided not in a single absolute king, but in a vast class of nobility, the Szlachta. This system was its greatest strength and its fatal flaw. On one hand, it created a fiercely independent warrior class, millions strong, who saw themselves as the guardians of liberty, both personal and national. This made the Commonwealth a formidable military power, capable of mobilizing enormous armies of well-equipped cavalry, the famed winged hussars. Their most celebrated moment came in 1683, when a Polish king, John III Sobieski, led a relief force to break the Ottoman siege of Vienna. That victory did not just save a city, it permanently checked the Ottoman advance into the heart of Europe, cementing the Commonwealth's reputation as the continent's indispensable shield. For a time, the system worked brilliantly. The nobility's liberty fostered a vibrant, tolerant society, a haven for diverse religious and ethnic groups amidst Europe's wars of faith. The state expanded to become one of the largest in Europe, a realm of open plains and grand ambitions. Yet the very liberties that empowered the nobility to defend the realm also made it nearly impossible to defend the realm from itself. The Commonwealth's political engine required near unanimity to function. The liberum veto, a parliamentary rule, allowed any single noble delegate to nullify all legislation passed during a session. What began as a safeguard for minority rights became a tool for paralysis. often exploited by foreign powers who bribed delegates to sabotage the state from within. While its neighbors like Russia and Prussia centralized power, building modern bureaucracies and standing armies, the Commonwealth remained a fractious collection of noble interests, unable to pass crucial taxes or military reforms. Its immense size became a liability, its borders impossible to defend with an army that relied on the voluntary mustering of its nobility. The Commonwealth, the great buffer, began to hollow out from the inside. By the late 18th century, the empires it had once buffered no longer saw it as a necessary wall, but as a vacuum of power, a tempting expanse of territory ripe for the taking. In a series of diplomatic maneuvers that redefined the map of Europe, Russia, Prussia, and Austria partitioned the Commonwealth, not in a single war, but through 3 successive land grabs between 1772 and 1795. The final dissolution was a quiet, bureaucratic tragedy. The state that had stopped the Ottomans at the gates of Vienna could not muster a defense against its own internal decay and the cold calculus of its neighbors. Its end teaches a sobering lesson about the life cycle of a buffer state. No matter how grand or powerful, its existence is a contract written by the giants around it, and that contract can be torn up the moment the balance of power shifts. Yet the most rugged and enduring buffer of the modern age was forged in the mountains of Central Asia. As the 19th century dawned, a new and shadowy contest unfolded across the roof of the world, a cold war of espionage and imperial ambition known as the Great Game. On one side stood the British Raj in India, determined to protect its crown jewel. On the other, the expanding Russian Empire pushing ever southward. Between them lay a land of stark beauty and brutal hardship, Afghanistan. To the mapmakers in London and St. Petersburg, it was a blank space, a strategic vacuum that had to be controlled. But to the Afghan rulers who navigated this new and deadly contest, their homeland was no empty pawn. It was the ultimate lever for survival. The genius of leaders like Dost Muhammad Khan lay in their acute understanding of imperial fear. He recognized that the mere possibility of his kingdom aligning with Russia was enough to send shivers through British India. He did not have to actually sign a treaty with the Tsar. He simply had to allow Russian envoys to visit his court to be seen listening. This perceived threat became his most powerful bargaining chip. From the British, he could then extract modern rifles, annual subsidies of silver, and most crucially, formal recognition of his sovereignty. He was playing a double-edged game, using the threat from the north to secure concessions from the south, all while insisting to both that Afghanistan sought only to be left alone. This high-stakes diplomacy reached its zenith under the Iron Amir, Abdur Rahman Khan. He ruled with an iron fist internally, forcibly unifying the country's fractious tribes, but his external policy was a masterpiece of pragmatic balance. He accepted a massive British subsidy and a steady supply of weapons, which he used to crush internal revolts and build a centralized state. In return, he granted Britain control over Afghanistan's foreign relations, a concession that sounded like surrender but was in practice a brilliant maneuver. It made the British Empire legally responsible for keeping other powers, namely Russia, out of Afghan affairs. London became the guarantor of Kabul's buffer status, obligated to defend the territory it could not conquer. The paradox of Afghanistan's position was cemented not in treaties, but in blood and disaster. Both empires learned the hard way that mapping Afghanistan was easier than holding it. The British suffered 2 of the most catastrophic military defeats in their imperial history there. The retreat from Kabul in 1842 became a byword for annihilation, where an army of over 16,000 soldiers and civilians was reduced to a single survivor by the harsh winter and relentless tribal attacks. Decades later, at the Battle of Maiwand in 1880, a British force was routed by Afghan fighters. These were not just battles lost, they were profound shocks to imperial confidence. For the Russians, the lesson came through observation and their own costly skirmishes in the north. They saw that subduing the Afghan highlands would require a vast, endless occupation, draining troops and treasure for a land that offered little but constant resistance. These military catastrophes, rather than weakening Afghanistan, paradoxically strengthened its hand. They forged a reputation, a kind of geopolitical legend, that the land and its people were unconquerable. This reputation became the final, unbreakable pillar of the buffer state. By the close of the century, a new understanding had crystallized in the foreign offices of Europe. A stable, independent Afghanistan, however troublesome, was infinitely preferable to a destabilizing war over its corpse. The Great Game's greatest lesson was that the most effective buffer is not always a loyal friend, but sometimes a formidable and prickly neutral whose very defiance guarantees the peace. The mountains had won not by diplomacy alone, but by making the cost of invasion a price no empire was willing to pay. This art of defiant neutrality found its most refined and successful expression far to the east in the gilded halls of Bangkok. While empires carved up continents in the late 19th century, one kingdom stood untouched, a sovereign island in a rising colonial sea. The Kingdom of Siam, the heart of modern Thailand, performed what historians still call a diplomatic miracle. Sandwiched between British Burma to the west and British Malaya to the south, and French Indochina pressing from the east, Siam faced the full, overwhelming force of European imperialism. Its survival was not an accident of geography, but the result of a deliberate, brilliant, and sometimes painful strategy masterminded by two visionary kings. They understood that in this new age, old forms of resistance were obsolete. You could not fortify a mountain pass against a gunboat, nor outmaneuver a telegraph with a fast horse. To survive as a buffer, Siam would have to transform itself to become so modern, so useful, and so strategically savvy that colonization seemed more trouble than it was worth. The first of these monarchs, King Mongkut, began this radical project. He was a scholar king who had spent decades as a Buddhist monk before ascending the throne, and he used that time to study not just scriptures but Western science and politics. He recognized that Siamese sovereignty depended on being taken seriously by European powers, so he opened the kingdom. He hired foreign advisors to modernize the army and the legal system. He learned to speak English and corresponded directly with Queen Victoria and President Lincoln, presenting himself not as an exotic Oriental ruler, but as a fellow monarch in a community of nations. Most strikingly, he adopted European customs at court, hosting grand balls and dinners for foreign diplomats. This was not mere imitation. It was a calculated performance of equality, designed to show the colonial powers that Siam was a civilized state, not a backward territory ripe for conquest. His son, King Chulalongkorn, inherited this vision and expanded it into a comprehensive national overhaul. His reign was a whirlwind of modernization, building railways, establishing a modern postal system, and abolishing slavery. These reforms served a dual purpose. They strengthened the Siamese state from within, making it more cohesive and administratively capable, while simultaneously demonstrating to foreign observers that Siam was progressing along a European model of development. It was a powerful argument against the colonial rationale of the civilizing mission. Why would France or Britain need to take over a country that was civilizing itself? Yet the true masterstroke of Siamese strategy was not in what they kept, but in what they willingly gave away. Both kings practiced a policy of calculated concession, a strategic retreat to save the kingdom. They meticulously mapped their realm and identified the peripheral territories that were most coveted by the British and French, lands that were ethnically Lao or Khmer, or regions that were difficult to control from Bangkok. Then they negotiated. To the French, they ceded large portions of what is now Laos and Cambodia. To the British, they surrendered claims over parts of the Malay Peninsula. These were not defeats snatched from the jaws of victory. They were premeditated sacrifices. The kings understood that trying to hold every distant province would lead to a war they could not win, a war that would give the Europeans an excuse to swallow the entire kingdom. By voluntarily ceding these outer lands, they turned potential flashpoints into diplomatic transactions. Each treaty drew a clear, internationally recognized border. Each concession bought something priceless: time, goodwill, and a guarantee of independence for the Siamese core. They were playing a brutal game of geopolitical chess, sacrificing pawns to protect the king. The strategy culminated in 1896, when Britain and France, weary of their own rivalry, signed an agreement guaranteeing Siam's independence as a neutral buffer between their colonial spheres. The kingdom had successfully inserted itself into the imperial balance of power, not as a victim, but as an essential component of regional stability. Siam's story is the ultimate testament to the buffer state's highest ideal: survival through supreme adaptability. It proved that sovereignty could be preserved not just by defiance, but by transformation, by learning the rules of a new and dangerous game so completely that you could play it to your own advantage. The ultimate merchant of the Middle was not a king or a general, but an entire city-state that turned neutrality into an art form. On the rugged Dalmatian coast, sheltered by limestone cliffs, the Republic of Ragusa carved out a world of its own. Today we know it as Dubrovnik, but for centuries it was a sovereign republic so small you could walk across it in an hour, yet its influence stretched across continents. Its survival was a breathtaking act of commercial and diplomatic acrobatics, perched precariously between the maritime might of Venice and the colossal land power of the Ottoman Empire. Ragusa's leaders understood a fundamental truth: their city had nothing but its location and its wits. They possessed no vast army or sprawling farmland. What they had was a perfect, deep water harbor on the seam between two worlds, and the sheer audacity to serve both without ever joining either. Their first and most important rule was strict, almost fanatical neutrality. The city's motto, Libertas, freedom, was not just a slogan, it was a business model. To maintain that freedom, they mastered the delicate dance of tribute. They paid an annual tax to the Ottoman Sultan, a formal acknowledgement of his supremacy that purchased something invaluable: the right for Ragusan merchants to trade freely throughout the entire Balkan interior, deep into Ottoman territory. At the same time, they carefully managed relations with Venice and the Kingdom of Hungary, offering respect and occasional payments to ensure their ships could sail the Adriatic and Mediterranean without harassment. This was not seen as weakness, but as a rational investment in access. By paying two masters, they guaranteed their goods could move in all directions. And move they did. The Ragusan fleet became the indispensable courier of the Mediterranean. Their ships, flying the distinctive white flag with the image of Saint Blaise, carried salt, wool, and silver from Christian Europe into the ports of the Ottoman Empire. On the return journey, they were laden with spices, silks, wax, and leather from the east. Ragusa transformed itself into the ultimate duty-free zone, a neutral marketplace where goods could change hands without the heavy tariffs and religious restrictions that choked trade elsewhere. Their warehouses were stacked with treasures, and their banks grew fat on finance and insurance. But this wealth was not protected by walls alone. It was secured by information. The Ragusans cultivated one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks of the early modern era. Their merchants, stationed in ports and capital cities from Constantinople to Seville, doubled as observers, sending coded reports back to the Senate in the Rector's palace. They tracked political shifts, monitored military movements, and gauged market moods. This early warning system allowed the Republic to adjust its diplomacy with lightning speed, offering a favorable loan here, delaying a shipment there, always staying one step ahead of any threat to its precious neutrality. The city itself became a living monument to this balancing act. Its formidable walls kept the world at a distance, while inside, a unique culture blossomed, blending Italian Renaissance artistry with Slavic and Eastern influences. It was a republic ruled by merchants where the goal was not conquest but continuity, where the greatest victory was another year of peaceful, profitable trade. Ragusa thrived by making itself utterly essential to the economies of both its powerful neighbors, proving that sometimes the most powerful sovereign is not the one who commands armies, but the one who controls the flow of goods and information. For centuries, this tiny republic demonstrated that in the cracks between empires, the most durable power could be built not on land, but on trust, neutrality, and the relentless pursuit of a good deal. High in the eastern Himalayan foothills, another kingdom wrote its own manual for survival. The kingdom of Manipur, with its lush valleys and surrounding blue-tinged hills, occupied a crossroads of empires. To its west lay the expanding British Raj in India. To the east and south, the Burmese Konbaung dynasty pressed its ambitions. To the north, the vast, if distant, authority of China's Qing dynasty cast a long shadow. For Manipur's rulers, this was not a trap but a chessboard. Their strategy was one of agile, armed diplomacy, offering their most famous export as a bargaining chip, the legendary Manipuri cavalry. These were not ordinary horsemen. Trained from childhood in a unique equestrian tradition, they were masters of mounted archery and swift, disruptive tactics, valued across the region as elite mercenaries. A Manipuri king, when dealing with the British East India Company, might pledge a regiment of his finest horsemen to assist in a campaign against a common foe, perhaps a rebellious hill tribe. Simultaneously, he would maintain respectful, tributary relations with the Burmese court, sending ceremonial gifts and reaffirming old bonds. The goal was to ensure both powerful neighbors saw Manipur as a useful ally, a source of formidable troops rather than as a target. This military diplomacy allowed the kingdom to preserve something extraordinary, its unique cultural heart. Isolated by its ring of mountains, Manipur developed a vibrant, distinct civilization. The Meitei people cultivated their own cosmology, their own artistic forms like the graceful Ras Leela dances depicting divine stories, and most remarkably, their own writing system, the Meitei script. This was not a borrowed alphabet, but a truly indigenous script used for centuries to record everything from royal chronicles to literary epics. Its continued use was a powerful statement of sovereign identity, a declaration that this was not merely a borderland, but a center of its own world. For generations, this balancing act worked. Manipur skillfully navigated the rivalries between Burma and Britain, its cavalry earning respect and its kings negotiating from a position of martial strength. But the geopolitical landscape began to shift in the 19th century. The British, after costly wars with Burma, sought direct, unquestioned control over the frontier. Manipur's cherished autonomy, maintained for so long through clever diplomacy and military service, began to look like an obstacle to imperial administration. Tensions finally erupted in 1891. A palace dispute over succession provided the pretext for British intervention. What followed was the brief, brutal Anglo-Manipur War. The conflict culminated in a pivotal engagement where British forces, with superior artillery, overcame Manipuri troops. In the war's aftermath, the British authorities made a symbolic and devastating decision. The last independent king was exiled. The ancient Meitei script, that centuries-old pillar of cultural identity, was officially suppressed in favor of the Bengali alphabet. The kingdom was annexed not as a princely state with internal autonomy, but as a directly administered territory. Manipur's story is a poignant chapter in the buffer state saga, demonstrating that even the most skilled martial diplomacy has a shelf life. When an empire's strategic calculus changes from managing frontiers to erasing them, the delicate art of balance can be overwhelmed by the blunt demand for control. The kingdom's legacy, however, did not vanish. It endured in the resilience of its culture, waiting in the hills for a different future. While Manipur's mountains were absorbed by a changing empire, another kingdom on the opposite side of the Indian Ocean wrote its history in fire, faith, and pepper. On the northern tip of Sumatra, where the Malacca Strait narrows like a funnel, the Sultanate of Aceh commanded one of the world's most vital sea lanes. For centuries, every ship sailing between the Indian Ocean and the markets of China and the Spice Islands had to pass its shores. Aceh did not merely occupy this space, it mastered it, becoming a wealthy, independent Islamic power that played the great empires of its age against each other with ruthless skill. Its story is one of a buffer state that refused to be passive, transforming its geographic destiny into a legacy of religious and commercial empire. Aceh's rise was fueled by the global hunger for one thing: pepper. The lush hills of its hinterland produced vast quantities of this black gold, making the Sultanate one of the richest pepper exporters in the world. This economic power attracted the attention of distant Constantinople. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire, seeing a chance to project its power as the leader of the Sunni Muslim world and counter Portuguese advances in the Indian Ocean, forged a strategic alliance with Aceh. This was not a relationship of subservience but of mutual benefit. The Ottomans provided Aceh with modern cannons, muskets, and military advisors, helping the Sultanate fortify its ports and resist European incursions. In return, Aceh became a powerful Islamic counterweight to Portuguese Malacca, ensuring Ottoman influence reached the far edges of Asia. This alliance gave Aceh the military technology and the religious prestige to declare itself not just a kingdom, but a center of Islamic learning and culture, known as the Veranda of Mecca. This period saw Aceh at its zenith. Its capital was a bustling, cosmopolitan port where Arab theologians, Gujarati merchants, and Chinese traders mingled in its markets. The Sultanate's courts became renowned centers for the study of Islamic law and mysticism, drawing scholars from across the Muslim world. Aceh's rulers skillfully balanced their spiritual role as defenders of the faith with their practical role as shrewd businessmen. They traded pepper with anyone who paid, including the very Portuguese and later English and Dutch traders they politically opposed. This commercial pragmatism kept wealth flowing in, which in turn funded the military strength that preserved their autonomy. For a time, Aceh was the undisputed regional power, a sovereign Islamic gateway that controlled the straits and dictated terms to foreign merchants. The nature of the threat, however, began to shift. By the 19th century, the Dutch East India Company had consolidated its control over much of the Indonesian archipelago. Their model was not trade, but direct colonial extraction, and an independent, powerful Aceh was the final and greatest obstacle to total domination of Sumatra. What followed was not a swift campaign, but a draining, decades-long conflict that would become the longest and most costly war in Dutch colonial history. The Aceh War, beginning in 1873, revealed the Sultanate's ultimate strength as a buffer, its ability to make conquest so agonizingly expensive that it called the entire colonial project into question. The Dutch expected a conventional war, but Aceh gave them a people's struggle. After initial setbacks, the Sultanate's resistance fragmented into a persistent guerrilla campaign led by local religious and community leaders known as ulama. The dense jungles and rugged terrain of Sumatra became a nightmare for European troops, who fell victim not just to ambushes but to widespread illness. The conflict dragged on for nearly 40 years, consuming Dutch lives and treasury at an alarming rate. This protracted resistance served as Aceh's final, powerful bargaining chip. Every year the war continued was another year the Dutch paid a staggering price for a strip of coastline and pepper fields. The Sultanate leveraged its fierce reputation, forcing the colonial power to question whether the prize was worth the endless cost. While Aceh was eventually subdued through a combination of intensified military pressure and a strategy of co-opting local elites, its conquest was a Pyrrhic victory that left deep scars on the Dutch colonial administration. The kingdom's prolonged defiance ensured it was the last major territory in the region to fall, a testament to how a determined buffer state can leverage even its own resistance as a final, powerful form of currency. Its legacy endured not in continued sovereignty, but in the indelible mark of its struggle and the enduring cultural identity it forged in the face of overwhelming force. The true legacy of these forgotten kingdoms is etched not just in treaties or battles, but in the very soul of their cultures. A fascinating pattern emerges when you step back from the individual stories of survival. These buffer states, by their very nature, became incredible crucibles of cultural synthesis. Forced to interact with multiple powerful neighbors, they did not merely borrow, they blended. They absorbed artistic styles, architectural techniques, religious ideas, and social customs from all sides, weaving them together into something entirely new and uniquely their own. This was not a sign of weakness or a lack of identity, but rather the source of their deepest resilience. A syncretic culture, one that could see value in the traditions of both friend and rival, was perfectly adapted to a life in the middle. It created a population that was adaptable, multilingual, and cosmopolitan, able to navigate the complex world around them with intuitive skill. Look at the stone and mortar of their cities. Armenian churches from the medieval period are a breathtaking example. They take the grand, vaulted basilica plan from the Byzantine Roman world, but then adorn it with intricate, floral stone carvings and symbolic motifs drawn directly from Persian Sasanian art. The result is neither fully Eastern nor Western, but a majestic Armenian style that could only have been born at that crossroads. Similarly, the culture of the Crimean Khanate was a rich tapestry. The Tatar language was Turkic. Their Islamic faith connected them to the wider Muslim world, but their daily life, their music, and even aspects of their governance were deeply influenced by centuries of interaction with Slavic, Greek, and Italian communities along the Black Sea coast. They were a distinct people forged from the steppe itself. Perhaps the most deliberate and successful fusion was engineered by the kings of Siam. King Mongkut and King Chulalongkorn enthusiastically adopted Western technology, administrative systems, and even sartorial styles for the court. They built railways and modernized the army, yet they did so not to become European, but to protect the Siamese core. They meticulously preserved the institution of the monarchy, the central role of Theravada Buddhism, and the key pillars of Thai social structure. The goal was to wrap a modern, defensible state around an ancient, enduring cultural heart. This ability to selectively adapt, to take what was useful from powerful neighbors without surrendering a core sense of self, is the ultimate cultural strategy of the buffer state. It allowed these communities to speak the language of empires while whispering the poetry of their own homeland. This synthesis created identities so strong and so specific that they often outlasted the political kingdoms that fostered them, living on in art, language, and tradition long after the maps were redrawn. What does it mean to belong to a place that belongs to everyone and no one? The constant state of vigilance cultivated a very specific kind of expertise. For many buffer states, the military readiness required for survival became a valuable export. When your entire existence depends on a formidable defense, you inevitably produce a surplus of highly skilled warriors. Selling that skill to outside powers was not just a revenue stream, it was a strategic masterstroke, a logical extension of their entire geopolitical business model. By renting out their soldiers as neutral parties, these states turned a defensive necessity into a profitable industry, one that often reinforced their own security. The most famous example echoes from the Alpine valleys of Switzerland. For centuries, the Swiss cantons were a loose confederation caught between the ambitions of France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Italian city-states. Their rugged terrain fostered a culture of hardy, independent militias, and their signature weapon, the long pike, used in dense, disciplined formations, proved devastating against knightly cavalry. By the late medieval period, Swiss pikemen were the most sought-after infantry in Europe. They fought not for a king, but for a contract, serving the French crown, the Pope, or various Italian princes. This mercenary service was a brilliant economic adaptation. It brought vast sums of gold back to the mountainous cantons, wealth that strengthened their communities and funded their own defenses. Crucially, it also established Switzerland's reputation as a neutral, professional force. An enemy would think twice about invading a territory that supplied the best soldiers to everyone, as it might cut off their own supply. The Swiss effectively weaponized their neutrality, making their military labor so indispensable that attacking them became bad for business across the continent. A similar story unfolded with the Albanian Stradiates. As the Ottoman Empire expanded into the Balkans, many Albanian lords and their cavalrymen, masters of light, irregular warfare, entered Venetian service. These Stradiates became famous for their speed, ferocity, and skill in reconnaissance and raiding, perfectly suited to the chaotic wars of Renaissance Italy. For Venice, hiring them was a way to gain elite troops familiar with Ottoman tactics. For the Albanian Stradiates, it was a path to prestige, land grants, and a life outside Ottoman control. They became a professional community within the Venetian military, their service a direct product of the buffer zone between the Venetian and Ottoman worlds. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of this mercenary economy comes from the Himalayan foothills. The fierce and loyal warriors from the hills of Nepal, known as Gurkhas, began serving the British East India Company after a hard-fought war in the early 19th century. Impressed by their martial prowess, the British began recruiting them into dedicated regiments. For the Kingdom of Nepal, this was a strategic calculation. Providing military service to the colossal British Raj generated income, fostered a stable diplomatic relationship, and allowed Nepal to maintain its internal sovereignty. The Gurkhas' legendary bravery and loyalty became their own form of diplomatic currency, a guarantee of Nepal's valued place within the British imperial system. In each case, the mercenary trade served multiple purposes. It converted military skill into hard currency. It created powerful patrons who had a vested interest in the buffer state's stability, and it projected a reputation of formidable strength that itself acted as a deterrent. A kingdom that could export fear was a kingdom worth preserving. But the most valuable commodity these states traded was not silk or silver, it was secrets. The very networks that moved goods across hostile borders also carried whispers from imperial courts and rumors from distant battlefields. A buffer state's unique position made it a natural clearinghouse for intelligence, and the most successful kingdoms learned to turn this constant flow of information into their most potent strategic asset. Their merchants were not just traders, they were observers with unparalleled access. A Ragusan spice merchant, for instance, could dock in the Ottoman port of Constantinople, hear gossip about a planned military campaign over cups of coffee, then sail to a Venetian-controlled island and share market news that subtly hinted at those same troop movements. He moved in worlds closed to official diplomats, his commercial cover providing a perfect disguise for gathering sensitive details. These merchants, along with pilgrims, scholars, and even refugees, formed a vast, informal intelligence web. Their reports, sent back to the ruling council in coded letters or carried by trusted couriers, gave buffer state leaders a panoramic view of regional politics. They knew which empire was preparing for war, which minister had fallen from favor, or where a harvest failure might cause instability. This was not passive eavesdropping, it was a systematic advantage. A ruler like the Doge of Ragusa or the Khan of Crimea could see conflicts forming months before they erupted, allowing him to adjust his own diplomacy, move his assets, or fortify his borders in advance. This foresight was priceless, but information, like any valuable good, could also be sold. The true genius lay in monetizing this intelligence without revealing the source. A buffer state might offer a carefully curated piece of information to a powerful neighbor as a gesture of goodwill. They could warn the Ottoman Sultan of a potential Russian mobilization, information they had gleaned from their own agents in the north. This made them appear loyal and indispensable. Simultaneously, they might assure the Russian Tsar through back channels that the Ottoman forces were preoccupied elsewhere, a different slice of the truth that encouraged calm. By controlling the narrative, they could manage the tensions between the giants, keeping the peace that was essential for their own trade and survival. The Crimean Khanate excelled at this dark art. Their Tatar horsemen, ranging across the steppe, were the eyes and ears of the region. They could report on the strength and location of Cossack settlements to the Russians, or detail the movements of Polish nobles to the Ottomans. This intelligence was their retainer fee, the unspoken price of their annual subsidy from Istanbul. It made the Khanate more than a mercenary force. It made them an early warning system, a living border fence that reported on every tremor along the frontier. For the great powers, this service was often worth more than the cost of conquest. Why spend a fortune on your own network of spies in a harsh, foreign land when a local power, with its own survival at stake, would do the job for you? The buffer state, in essence, outsourced its own surveillance and then sold the reports back to the very empires that threatened it. This transformed their greatest vulnerability, their exposure to multiple powers, into their ultimate shield. Their geographic position became an informational asset, making them so useful as intermediaries that destroying them would mean blinding oneself to the world beyond the border. In the high-stakes game of empires, the kingdom that controlled the flow of secrets often held the most powerful cards of all. Yet this constant external pressure demanded an equally robust internal structure. A buffer state could not afford the luxury of internal division, for its enemies were always watching, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. The relentless need to present a unified front to rival empires forced these nations to develop remarkably effective systems of internal governance, often choosing one of two distinct paths. Some built powerful, centralized monarchies where authority flowed from a single, unquestioned ruler. In these kingdoms, the king was not merely a sovereign, but the chief diplomat and commander-in-chief, whose primary duty was the survival of the state itself. Autocracy became a tool for speed and decisiveness. There was no time for lengthy debates when an Ottoman envoy demanded an answer or a Mughal army gathered on the horizon. A ruler like the Crimean Khan or the Siamese monarch needed the absolute power to levy taxes, raise armies, and make binding treaties without consulting a fractious nobility. This centralized model streamlined the high-wire act of foreign policy, allowing for the rapid, often secret, negotiations that kept the giants at bay. The state's entire bureaucracy, its tax collection, its legal system, all were often designed with one overriding purpose: to funnel resources and loyalty upward to sustain that crucial external balancing act. The kingdom's wealth was not for lavish courts, but for bribes, mercenaries, and fortifications. Its laws were crafted to prevent internal rebellion that could invite foreign intervention. In this context, a strong, sometimes harsh, ruler was seen not as a tyrant, but as a necessary pilot steering the ship through a perpetual storm. The alternative model was just as fascinating and in some ways even more resilient. Other buffer states developed highly decentralized yet deeply cohesive social structures. Think of the tribal confederacies of the Afghan highlands or the noble republic of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Here, power was distributed, not concentrated. Survival depended on a different kind of strength, the voluntary allegiance of fiercely independent groups bound by a common cause. For the Afghan tribes, the shared identity of faith, language, and custom, combined with the ever-present external threat, forged a social contract that could mobilize entire populations against an invader. No single Khan could command them, but in the face of a British or Soviet army, they could unite with astonishing speed. Their decentralization was, paradoxically, their defense, as there was no central capital or leader whose capture would mean surrender. The enemy was forced to fight 100 small wars instead of one big one. Similarly, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's noble republic, for all its later flaws, initially created a powerful sense of shared ownership among the Szlachta. These nobles believed they were not subjects, but stakeholders in the republic's survival as the bulwark of Christendom. This collective identity motivated them to muster their private armies for the common defense. The internal bargain was clear. The nobility enjoyed extraordinary liberties and controlled the state, but in return, they were obligated to defend it with their lives and fortunes. Whether through the iron grip of a central ruler or the woven strength of a collective pact, these states understood a fundamental truth: internal strife was a poison they could not metabolize. A civil war was not just a tragedy, it was an engraved invitation for neighboring empires to march in as peacekeepers or conquerors. Therefore, the social contracts within these nations, whether written in law or understood in custom, were overwhelmingly geared toward maintaining unity. They cultivated a culture where loyalty to the survival of the homeland often superseded personal ambition or regional difference. This internal cohesion, forged in the fire of external danger, became the silent engine that powered their diplomatic dances and economic schemes for generations. Yet for all their ingenuity, these stories of survival share a common, sobering epilogue. No matter how clever the diplomacy or how formidable the defense, the golden age of a buffer state is often followed by a slow, inevitable squeeze. This decline is rarely a sudden, dramatic collapse. Instead, it is a gradual erosion, a quiet shift in the fundamental mathematics of power that makes the middle ground untenable. The end comes not because the buffer state fails at its art, but because the world around it changes the rules of the game. The most common catalyst is a decisive shift in the balance between the neighboring giants. For centuries, the survival of a kingdom like Armenia depended on a rough parity between Rome and Parthia. If one grew significantly stronger than the other, that delicate equilibrium shattered. The stronger empire no longer saw the buffer as a necessary cushion, but as an obstacle to its expansion, or worse, a potential ally for its weakened rival. The buffer's careful neutrality, once its shield, could be reinterpreted as hostility by the ascendant power. Why tolerate a fence when you can own the whole yard? This shift could be military, economic, or dynastic. The rise of a particularly ambitious and capable ruler in one empire, someone with the vision and resources to ignore old conventions, often spelled doom for the states in between. Their intricate web of treaties and tributes, built over generations, could be torn apart by a single monarch's decree. The other great force of obsolescence was technological and administrative advancement. For much of history, the buffer state thrived because direct imperial rule over distant, rugged territories was inefficient and costly. It was easier and cheaper to let a local king manage the frontier, collect the taxes, and fight the bandits so long as he remained nominally loyal. But what happens when an empire learns to govern at a distance? The invention of the telegraph, the construction of railways, and the development of modern bureaucracy changed everything. These tools allowed a central government in London, Paris, or St. Petersburg to project its power directly and reliably to the farthest edges of its domain. A standing army could be supplied by rail, orders could be sent instantly by wire, and a professional civil service could administer a province without relying on local nobles. Suddenly, the unique services offered by the buffer state, secure trade routes, local intelligence, frontier defense, could be performed more efficiently by the empire itself. The buffer's economic niche evaporated. Its strategic value as a neutral zone was rendered obsolete by an empire's newfound ability to simply step over it. The fate of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is a textbook example. Its political paralysis made it unable to modernize its military or centralize its state, while its neighbors Prussia, Russia, and Austria were aggressively doing both. By the late 18th century, these centralized, militarily efficient powers no longer saw the Commonwealth as a useful bulwark. They saw it as a vacuum, a space of weakness between them that could be neatly divided and absorbed into their own, more modern systems of control. The partitions were not a conquest in the traditional sense, they were an administrative annexation. Similarly, the British conquest of Manipur was less about defeating a peer army and more about imposing a new model of direct colonial administration that had no room for an independent, martial kingdom with its own script and laws. The squeeze is a reminder that a buffer state's existence is a contract written by the empires around it. Its terms are not permanent. When the strategic landscape transforms, when the cost-benefit analysis tips, that contract is simply voided. The story of their disappearance, therefore, is not one of tragic failure, but of a completed historical role. They existed because they solved a problem for greater powers, and they vanished when those powers found a new solution. The final act for the Great Commonwealth was not a thunderous battle, but a quiet, methodical dismemberment. It stands as the most chillingly clinical example of the squeeze, where three neighboring empires decided the buffer was no longer useful, only inconvenient. For generations, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had served its purpose, acting as a vast, if unwieldy, shield between the ambitions of Russia, Prussia, and Austria. But by the late 18th century, its internal architecture, once a source of strength, had become a catalogue of fatal weaknesses. The political system was engineered for paralysis. The liberum veto, a rule allowing any single noble delegate to dissolve the national parliament and nullify all its laws, had turned from a safeguard into a weapon of state suicide. Foreign ambassadors routinely bribed delegates to wield this veto, ensuring no meaningful reform on taxation or military modernization could ever pass. Meanwhile, the economy rested on the backs of a vast, disenfranchised peasantry locked in serfdom, a system that stifled innovation and created deep social fractures. The Commonwealth was like a grand, ornate mansion with a crumbling foundation, its rooms filled with arguing occupants while a storm gathered outside. The storm arrived not as a single enemy, but as a coordinated agreement between landlords who had grown tired of the noisy house next door. Russia, Prussia, and Austria, each undergoing a process of centralization and military modernization, looked upon their massive, stagnant neighbor and saw the same thing: opportunity. The old logic of maintaining a buffer had reversed. A strong, independent Poland-Lithuania might one day ally with a rival, upsetting the balance. A weak, chaotic Poland-Lithuania was a constant source of instability, a haven for political radicals, and a vacuum that tempted preemptive moves from the others. The most convenient solution, arrived at through secret diplomatic correspondence and cynical realpolitik, was to simply erase the problem. There would be no grand war of conquest, for that might trigger a wider conflict between the partitioning powers themselves. Instead, they chose collusion. The process unfolded in 3 deliberate acts over 23 years. The first partition, in 1772, was framed almost as an intervention, a necessary stabilization by the neighboring powers to restore order after internal chaos. They took substantial slices of territory but left the core of the Commonwealth nominally independent. The message was clear: sovereignty was now a privilege granted by its neighbors. The shock of this loss did spur a final, desperate attempt at self-preservation. In 1791, a wave of patriotic reformers managed to pass the Constitution of the 3rd of May, a groundbreaking document that abolished the liberum veto, established a hereditary monarchy, and sought to modernize the state. It was the Commonwealth's last great act of defiance, a proof that it could still change, and that was precisely why it could not be allowed to stand. A revived, modernized Poland-Lithuania was the exact opposite of what its neighbors wanted. In response, a conservative faction of nobles, opposed to the constitution, invited Russian intervention. The reforms were crushed by Russian armies, setting the stage for the second, and then the definitive third partition in 1795. With that final stroke, a kingdom that had once spanned from the Baltic to the Black Sea vanished from the map of Europe. The partitions were a diplomatic crime scene with no single culprit, only accomplices. The three empires met, negotiated borders over charts, and systematically absorbed the territory, dividing its libraries, its archives, and its people. The Commonwealth story delivers the ultimate lesson of the buffer state's mortality. Its end came not because it failed to balance, but because the powers it balanced between collectively decided that balance was no longer in their interest. The squeeze became a consensus. The middle ground was not overrun, it was quietly, legally, parceled out and stamped with new imperial seals, a stark reminder that in geopolitics, utility has an expiration date. While the Commonwealth was carved up by treaty, another great buffer met its end not at a conference table, but within the tangled branches of a family tree. The Kingdom of Burgundy's dissolution was a quieter affair, a slow-motion inheritance dispute played out over generations. Its territories were not seized in a sudden war, but passed from hand to hand through the most powerful tools of medieval statecraft, marriage and bloodline. For centuries, the Dukes of Burgundy had expertly played France against the Holy Roman Empire, weaving a rich tapestry of lands from the Netherlands down through eastern France. Their court was among Europe's most splendid, a center of art, chivalry, and immense wealth drawn from the trade routes they controlled. Yet this very success contained the seeds of their undoing. By accumulating so many prosperous territories, they had built a prize too tempting to leave in the hands of a single, independent dynasty. The end began with a single, catastrophic misstep. In 1477, Duke Charles the Bold, a ruler of fierce ambition, met his end on the battlefield at Nancy. He died without a male heir. In the blink of an eye, the brilliant balancing act of generations collapsed. The intricate duchy was not a unified nation in the modern sense, but a personal collection of fiefdoms tied to the Duke himself. With no direct son to inherit, the entire inheritance became a dynastic free-for-all. Two powerful houses immediately pressed their claims, based on marriages made decades earlier. The King of France, Louis XI, asserted his right as the feudal overlord for the Burgundian heartlands in eastern France. To the north, the Habsburg family, through Charles the Bold's daughter, Mary, claimed the rich Low Countries, the counties of Flanders, Brabant, and Holland. What followed was a protracted, complex legal and military struggle, but its outcome was inevitable. The buffer was being absorbed, not conquered. France moved methodically to annex the duchy proper, integrating its administration into the royal domain. The Habsburgs, through Mary's marriage to Maximilian of Austria, secured the northern provinces, weaving them into a burgeoning empire that would soon span continents. This process took years, marked by skirmishes, negotiations, and local revolts, but the fundamental reality was clear. the independent political entity known as Burgundy was gone, dismantled by the very dynastic networks it had once used to secure its power. Its legacy did not vanish, of course. The artistic patronage of its dukes left an indelible mark on European culture. The administrative systems of its northern provinces became a model for early modern bureaucracy. But the kingdom itself, as a sovereign force navigating the middle ground, was erased. Its story illustrates a softer, yet equally final, pathway for a buffer state's end. When its survival hinges on the life of a single ruler and a favorable pattern of births and marriages, it lives on borrowed time. The death of a childless duke or the failure to produce an heir could unravel a century of careful diplomacy, allowing the waiting empires to simply step in and collect their inheritance. Burgundy faded not with a bang, but with the rustle of parchment and the quiet closing of a dynastic ledger. The age of kings and empires may have faded, but the strategic logic of the buffer state did not vanish with them. It simply put on a new suit. The 20th century, with its ideological wars and globe-spanning rivalries, created fresh demand for that ancient art of survival in the middle. The playgrounds were now entire nations, and the stakes were not just territory, but the fate of the world order. In this new arena, the old playbook of neutrality, multi-vector diplomacy, and carving out an economic niche found powerful, modern expressions. Perhaps no country embodies this Cold War reality more starkly than Afghanistan. Having spent the 19th century as the buffer between Tsarist Russia and British India, it found itself in the 20th as the pivotal ground between the Soviet Union and the United States. Its strategy was hauntingly familiar to that of its earlier rulers. Afghan leaders, while officially non-aligned, expertly leveraged the superpower rivalry. They accepted massive economic and military aid from both sides, using Soviet funds to build infrastructure and American weapons to modernize their army. The goal was not to pick a side, but to extract maximum benefit from both, maintaining a precarious independence by ensuring that neither Moscow nor Washington could afford to let the other gain full control. For a time, this high-wire act worked, turning the country into a recipient of wealth from competing ideologies. Yet, as history had shown so many times before, this game carries immense risk. When the internal balance of a buffer state falters, or when one neighboring power decides the cost of competition is too high, the delicate structure can collapse with devastating consequences. The Soviet invasion in 1979 was a brutal recalculation, an attempt to replace a complex balancing act with direct control, and it triggered a chain of events that demonstrated the terrible price paid when a buffer's neutrality shatters. A very different and far more successful Cold War balancing act was performed much closer to the Soviet heartland. Finland, sharing an 800-mile border with the USSR, faced an existential dilemma after the Second World War. How could a small, Western democracy remain free while literally bordering a superpower that had just demonstrated its willingness to use force? The answer was not membership in NATO, but the brilliant formulation of Finlandization. This was not surrender, but a supremely pragmatic and active foreign policy. Finland maintained its democratic system and market economy, but it made a conscious public commitment to neutrality. It assured Moscow it would not join any alliance hostile to the Soviet Union, and it carefully calibrated its public statements and policies to avoid provoking its giant neighbor. This was multi-vector diplomacy in a bipolar world. Finland cultivated strong economic and cultural ties with the West, but it did so without fanfare or strategic challenge to the East. It built a niche as a trusted mediator, hosting diplomatic talks and becoming a global leader in peacekeeping. By making itself stable, predictable, and non-threatening, Finland secured its sovereignty and prosperity. It turned its vulnerable geography into a source of diplomatic strength, proving that even in the shadow of a superpower, a determined nation could write its own rules for survival. That same strategic space exists today, alive and well in the vast steppes of Mongolia. Landlocked between Russia and China, two resurgent giants with intertwined economies and complex histories, Mongolia is a 21st-century buffer state in classic form. Its leaders are modern masters of the ancient craft. Their policy is called the Third Neighbor Strategy, a deliberate effort to cultivate deep political and economic relationships beyond the two that physically surround them. Mongolia welcomes investment from both Beijing and Moscow, supplying them with crucial resources like coal and copper. Yet, simultaneously, it actively pursues partnerships with Japan, South Korea, the United States, and the European Union. It hosts joint military exercises with partners like the United States, not to antagonize, but to demonstrate its value as a secure, neutral partner in a volatile region. It has positioned itself as a champion of nuclear weapon-free zones and democratic governance, a brand that distinguishes it from its powerful neighbors and attracts support from the wider international community. Mongolia is not hiding between Russia and China. It is networking through them, using its geographic position to attract a diverse portfolio of allies. Its goal is to become so economically connected and diplomatically valuable to a wide array of nations that any move by a single neighbor to compromise its sovereignty would trigger concern from many others. This is the modern buffer state playbook, executed with digital age tools but guided by a wisdom centuries old. The currencies have changed from silver and spices to foreign direct investment and diplomatic capital, and the rivalries are as much about trade routes and technological supremacy as they are about marching armies. But the core principles endure. The buffer state survives by being more useful independent than conquered, by understanding the fears and desires of powerful neighbors, and by cultivating a unique identity that makes it an indispensable and peacefully neutral piece on the global board. Their remarkable stories beg a difficult question. If these states were so successful, so ingenious, why are their names absent from our common historical memory? The answer lies not in their failure, but in the way history itself has been written. For centuries, the dominant narratives have been crafted by the victors, by the centralized empires that eventually absorbed these middle kingdoms. From that imperial perspective, the buffer state was rarely a hero in its own right. It was a peripheral detail, a temporary obstacle on the path to glory, or at best, a loyal vassal. Historians chronicling the grand sweep of Rome, the conquests of the Moguls, or the rise of the British Empire had little incentive to dwell on the sophisticated statecraft of the Armenian king who played them against a rival. That story complicated a simpler tale of imperial destiny. The buffer state's greatest strength, its hybrid identity, became its greatest liability in the history books. A kingdom that blended Persian and Byzantine influences, or one that practiced both Hindu and Muslim court rituals, did not fit the clean, modern categories of the nation-state. 19th and 20th century historians, often working within rigid national frameworks, struggled to place these culturally fluid entities. Was Armenia European or Asian? Was the Crimean Khanate a steppe empire or an Ottoman province? Their refusal to be easily labeled made them inconvenient, and so they were often pushed to the margins of regional studies or omitted from the grand narrative altogether. Furthermore, the very nature of their achievement worked against their fame. Theirs was a story of subtlety, of patient negotiation, of economic cunning and diplomatic finesse. These are quiet arts. They lack the thunderous cinematic drama of a legion's march or a cavalry charge. Popular history, and even much academic history, has long been captivated by the clear clash of armies, the decisive battle, the charismatic conqueror. The decades-long, successful maintenance of peace through brilliant statecraft is a harder story to tell. It does not produce a single iconic date or a towering statue. It produces treaties, trade ledgers, and cultural fusion, which are far less likely to capture the imagination. So, these masters of the middle were slowly written out of the story. Their existence was acknowledged, but often as a footnote to the real history happening in the imperial capitals. They were remembered as places that were fought over, not as places that cleverly managed the fighting. This erasure has cost us a deeper understanding of how the world actually worked. It presents history as a series of monolithic blocks colliding, when in reality, the spaces between those blocks were vibrant, intelligent, and essential worlds of their own. To rediscover them is to recover a lost manual on survival, a testament to the power of agility over brute force, and a reminder that some of the most enduring victories leave the quietest echoes. Rediscovering these forgotten states does more than just fill gaps in a history book. It rewires how we understand power itself. For too long, we have viewed the past as a simple story of giants, a binary clash of empires where the only outcomes were victory or defeat. The buffer states reveal a far more intricate and realistic world, a multipolar landscape where numerous centers of intelligence and agency coexisted. Their stories teach us that history is not just written by the victors, it is also shaped by the survivors, by those who found a way to persist in the shadows of might. This rediscovery offers urgent lessons in three vital arts: the art of pragmatic statecraft, the art of resilient identity, and the art of navigating an uneven world. First, consider pragmatic statecraft. These kingdoms were the ultimate realists. They understood that moral absolutes or rigid ideologies were luxuries they could not afford. Their diplomacy was flexible, situational, and ruthlessly focused on one goal: continued existence. A Ragusan senator did not base his trade policy on whether he liked the Ottoman Sultan. He based it on what kept Ragusan ships sailing. A Siamese king adopted Western customs not because he adored European culture, but because it was the most effective way to signal that his kingdom was not a backward territory. This is not a lesson in cynicism, but in clear-eyed prioritization. It is a masterclass in knowing what is truly non-negotiable, your core sovereignty and cultural heart, and being willing to adapt everything else, your alliances, your economic models, even your courtly fashion, to protect that core. For any entity, be it a nation or an organization, facing overwhelming external pressure, their example is a guide to strategic flexibility. How do you maintain your purpose when the world around you demands conformity? The buffer states answered that question for centuries. Second, their legacy is a profound lesson in resilient identity. These cultures did not merely endure, they synthesized. They absorbed influences from all sides and wove them into something new and uniquely theirs. The Armenian stonemason who blended Byzantine and Persian motifs was not creating a confused imitation. He was forging a bold declaration of Armenian distinctness. This ability to integrate external elements without being consumed by them is the hallmark of a confident, adaptive culture. It suggests that the strongest identities are not those built on purity and isolation, but those built on the conscious, selective integration of the world around them. In our own era of global connection and cultural exchange, this is a powerful model. It shows that preserving who you are does not require building a wall, but rather developing a keen filter, knowing what to adopt, what to adapt, and what to reject in order to strengthen your own story. Finally, and perhaps most acutely, their experiences provide a vital lens for understanding the dilemmas of small and medium-sized states today. The world is once again a stage of great power competition, with nations caught between the economic, military, and diplomatic pull of rival giants. The modern equivalents of Siam or Finland are everywhere, from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia, navigating their relationships with larger neighbors and global powers. The buffer state playbook, updated for the digital age, is being used in real time. We see it in the third neighbor strategies that seek diverse partnerships to avoid over-reliance on any single power. We see it in the careful, neutral diplomacy that prioritizes economic connectivity while avoiding military entanglements. The old challenges remain: how to accept investment without sacrificing autonomy, how to guarantee security without provoking a larger conflict, how to trade with everyone without alienating anyone. The forgotten masters of the middle-spent generations wrestling with these exact problems, and their successes and failures are a rich repository of strategic wisdom. Their stories remind us that in a world of giants, the space between is not empty, it is alive with agency, creativity, and hard-won wisdom. By listening to their echoes, we gain not just a fuller picture of the past, but a sharper toolkit for understanding the fragile, brilliant art of survival in an unbalanced world. Their stories converge on a single, breathtaking truth. These forgotten kingdoms mastered the fragile art of balance. They transformed a fundamental vulnerability, their precarious location between rival powers, into the very source of their strength, their wealth, and their cultural vitality. Their thriving was not a historical accident, but a deliberate, high-stakes achievement. It was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming force, a proof that agility and intelligence could, for generations, defy the sheer weight of empires. They built civilizations not on conquest but on connection, becoming the essential brokers, the trusted messengers, and the creative synthesizers of their age. Their success was measured in the quiet hum of a bustling marketplace, in the intricate carvings of a hybrid cathedral, and in the decades of peace they brokered between giants who could have turned their lands to dust. Yet their ultimate disappearance from the map underscores a grim and enduring geopolitical reality. A buffer state exists only as long as the surrounding powers find it useful. Its sovereignty is a conditional grant, a lease negotiated with the threat of force. When the strategic calculus shifts, when an empire develops new tools for direct control, or when rival giants decide cooperation is more profitable than competition, the middle ground is erased. The squeeze is inevitable. This finality, however, does not diminish their legacy. It clarifies it. These states were not meant to last forever. They were brilliant, temporary solutions to the problem of imperial friction. Their true legacy is not a list of fallen kingdoms, but a powerful reminder of the spaces in between. It is a reminder that history is not just a story of monolithic empires clashing, but of the vibrant, intelligent worlds that flourished in the cracks. They teach us that even in a world shaped by giants, there is always room for the clever, the adaptable, and the resilient. Their forgotten brilliance challenges us to look beyond the obvious centers of power, to listen for the echoes of diplomacy in mountain passes, and to see the enduring strength woven into cultures born from balance. In remembering them, we recover a lost manual for navigating an uneven world, written not by the victors, but by the ultimate survivors. History's truest victors were often its most nimble survivors. Their stories, resurrected from the margins, offer us a powerful new lens. We have journeyed through a world of forgotten ingenuity, where kingdoms turned peril into prosperity, not by matching the strength of giants, but by mastering the spaces between them. Their playbook, though written in different scripts across different centuries, shared three brilliant, timeless strategies. First was the high-wire act of diplomatic juggling, a perpetual dance of offering just enough loyalty to keep multiple empires satisfied, but never so much that it triggered a fatal invasion. Second was the art of economic niche control, transforming a strategic corridor into a vital marketplace, a source of unique goods, or a bank for warring powers, making independence more profitable for everyone than conquest. And third, perhaps most enduring, was the genius of cultural synthesis, absorbing and blending the influences of powerful neighbors to forge a resilient, hybrid identity that was entirely their own. These were not just tactics for staying alive, they were blueprints for building vibrant civilizations in the most precarious of places. The echoes of their wisdom are not confined to dusty chronicles. We hear them today in the careful neutrality of modern nations navigating great power rivalries, in the economic diversification strategies that seek many partners instead of one master, and in the cultural confidence of communities that draw strength from multiple roots. Their legacy is a testament to the power of agility over brute force, of connection over isolation, and of the profound truth that sovereignty can be defended with a merchant's scale and a diplomat's word as effectively as with a soldier's sword. So the next time you look at a map, do not just see the great blocks of color that mark old empires. Look for the ghost lines between them. In those interstitial spaces, you might just hear the faint, enduring whisper of a forgotten kingdom that thrived. What other hidden buffers, what other masters of the middle have we overlooked? If you know of another remarkable story of a state that flourished in the cracks, share it with our community below. Let us keep rediscovering these quiet victors together.